Make sure you make second one.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome again if you're just joining us to the 2026 Bocas Lit Fest. Please first give yourselves a round of applause for being here. And a special thank you for those of us joining us via the festival live stream. We have an event that is sure to bring humor, commerce, bacchanal, peacock, intrigue, romance, vexation, plenty lyrics, all the things you look for essentially in a riveting read. You're going to find it in these two books by these two authors. Please welcome Lance Dowrich, author of Long Rope from Maga Goat. Lance is joined by Scarlet Ibis James, the author of Scarlet Birthright. And as you'll hear, these stories are all about family, friendship, and what makes a place a home. We are delighted, of course, to have this event hosted by the extremely competent and capable Ryan Bachoo. And just FYI, if you didn't know, you may be accustomed to seeing Ryan on your TV screens in one capacity, but he is also a published author of fiction.
Thank you so very much. So last year, I had the privilege of actually being on this stage as a panelist. And so I'm really honored and extremely happy to be back on this stage, albeit this afternoon as a moderator with two incredible writers. And so this afternoon, we're going to step into two richly imagined worlds where really, humor softens hardship. Suspense keeps turning every page. And just as well, beauty of this thing we call human connection. Caribbean storytelling has always carried with it the rhythm of real life, sharp, emotional, unpredictable, but also deeply rooted in this thing we call place. And so, joining me are two outstanding authors, as Shivani would have mentioned. Scarlet Ibis James, who authored Scarlet Birthright, and Lance Dowrich, author of Long Rope for Magagoat. And this afternoon, we'll be exploring how they were able to weave together humor, tension, and love in their stories, which are, if you have read the books, unmistakably Caribbean. And so we want to start this afternoon by first inviting both authors to come on to this podium and to read an excerpt out of their novels for just about 8 to 10 minutes. I'll start with Lance.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon to everyone. So I'll read from the title story of my book, Long Rope for Magagoat. The story is about a young boy whose father left the home and he navigated the rest of his life without a father, and it made for some comical situations. In case you are wondering, it is a true story. So Sam grew up and he met a young lady by the name of Daphne. It was only after she became Mrs. Sam that she discovered that Sam was the literal reincarnation of the Good Samaritan. The newlyweds moved to a rented house in Barataria. Daily, when he dropped Daphne to work at the General Hospital, dressed in her lily-white nurse's uniform, he would stop for any random person walking along the roadway. His question would be, "Where you going?" Daphne tried to talk him out of it, but he resisted, as he was quite clear he was doing what the good Lord expected of him. One day, they chanced upon a man carrying a large crocus bag of cassava atop his head. "Let me help this man, darling. Come round." He slowed down and instructed the stranger, "Put your bag in the tray and let me go." The man gleamed with his 8 remaining teeth, like he was blessed by the Black Madonna at the La Divina Pastoral Church on Maundy Thursday. With a spring to his step, he hoisted his bag onto the tray of the van and opened the passenger door. Daphne, frozen in the passenger seat, took what seemed like an eternity to slide around to the middle seat closest to Sam. "Come round, darling," coaxed Sam. The unexpected passenger, gleefully climbing into the seat next to her, was gritty, smelly, and caked with mud. With Daphne next to him, Sam made sure his additional passenger was safely seated in the van. He asked, "You inside? Where you going?" Mr. Passenger replied, "Belmont." Adhering to his Good Samaritan checklist, he looked at Daphne and asked, "You comfortable?" Then, mentally calculating his route, Sam said, "I go drop you first, darling. Then I go swing round and drop my partner here." With this, he chugged off into Port of Spain. When Daphne alighted the van in front of the central block of the Port of Spain General Hospital, her once white uniform was irreverently smeared with mud down her left side. Her grubby metamorphosis was extraordinary. Sam waved at her, saying, "Enjoy your day, I'll see you later." A couple of months later, with the passing of one of Daphne's relatives, they set off to attend the funeral in Mayaro. The commute from Port of Spain to the southeasterly coastal town of Mayaro was approximately 3 hours of driving in Sam's old clunker. Along the Manahambre Road, winding through the picturesque cane fields of Usine St. Madeleine. As Sam navigated the corner, descending the gentle gradient alongside the pond at Usine St. Madeleine, he saw a man and woman walking. Although the man wore a purple shirt, the woman was dressed in black. Sam asked Daphne, "You think they're going to the funeral?" Before Daphne could muster an answer, Sam stopped abruptly alongside the couple. "All you going to the funeral?" They shook their heads in affirmation. Then, to Daphne's dismay, he uttered the dreaded words, "Jump in." Blissful memories of the nylon pool while on their honeymoon in Tobago faded from her memory. As the circumstances became clear, Daphne held fast to the adage that there's hope when the fat lady hasn't sung. Her thoughts were based on the fact that a rather slim man was dwarfed by his large wife. The man introduced himself as Jim and his wife as Mabel. Slim Jim could have easily sat in the van with Daphne and Sam, but Mabel could not, would not fit, and in Daphne's mind, should not sit in the cab of the 3-seater van. An obvious conundrum presented itself when Daphne alighted the vehicle and beckoned to Mabel and Jim to be seated. It was water more than floor, and everybody realized that the cab could hold everyone. Sam turned to Mabel and said, I feel you had to sit down in the back. Sam's benevolence was on the verge of being upended in the ensuing impromptu wrestling match featuring the tag team of Sam and Slim Jim, pushing Mabel onto the tray of the van. She was a mature woman whose vital statistics were dimensionally on the rosy side of plump, with a derriere that defied the recorded parameters of a human buttocks. She couldn't lift her legs up over the side, so Sam and his Spencer Slim partner had to maneuver under this large woman. At one point it was touch and go, and the van rocked precariously. It could have been Bam Bam over the side or death by Bam Bam. Jim said, we go lift on 1, 2, squatting under Mabel like an Olympic weightlifter, taking the brunt of her weight. Sam abruptly interjected and shouted, what the ass wrong with you? We go dead before we reach 3. Just push the man. Daphne sat in the cab, staring through the rear window of the unfolding drama, thinking that she was on the verge of becoming a widow, wondering why the couple didn't politely refuse Sam's offer. She visualized Sam's epithet, etched in stone at the Lapero Cemetery, as a good Samaritan whose last deed was too heavy. When they finally got Mabel in the tray, Sam mopped the beads of sweat from his brow and returned to the driver's seat. He started the ignition and asked Jim, now seated next to Daphne, you just lift her up often? He continued, give Jackie jacket, Jimmy Jim boots, and me a drink of rum, you strong boy. Mabel sat uneasily in the tray, holding on for dear life around sharp corners on the winding road to Mayaro. Daphne also sat uneasily in the seat for the next hour and a half, until they reached the funeral. In the church, Daphne knelt and fervently asked God for patience. She also asked the good Lord and Savior to ward off the threat of all pedestrians on the straight, narrow, or winding roads on the way back to Port of Spain.
How Caribbean is that story? Thank you very much, Lance. Excellent. I'd like to now welcome Scarlet Ibis James, who will read from her novel, Scarlet's Birthright.
Hello, everyone. This is taken from the very first chapter, selected excerpts. This is about Jerome, the father. Tonight would change everything. The front door swung open, letting in a blast of warm night air. It carried the sweet scent of frangipani from our front yard. Every conversation came to a jarring stop, like a needle yanked off a spinning record. No armor could defend me from what happened next. Her. She sashayed into the fence, swinging those hips seductively, then pausing in the doorway where the yellow porch light caught her silhouette, her massive afro, a halo of dark, untamed power, seemed to catch and trap the dim light of the room. My mind raced to categorize her, and I couldn't find any classification that could do her justice. Even the way she held her clutch, casual but commanding, made it clear she belonged anywhere she chose to be. A barely there red mini dress clung to her curves, skimming her shoulders. teasing the small swell of her breasts and stopping just shy of scandal. It tugged her in a way that broke every rule and made my 19-year-old self glad it did. She stood in the doorway, scanning the crowded room like she was taking inventory. Something intense ignited within me. It burned through the hidden guardrails of my mind. It hit like a rogue wave, leaving me stripped and exposed, raw in a way that was equal parts thrill and terror. My chest tightened, warmth spreading fast, and I felt like I was caught without armor, bare, vulnerable. What? What the hell is this? The record on my turntable was ending. The bass line faded, but I couldn't move to change it. The music cut off abruptly. The telltale scratch of silence made every head in the party turn towards me. Heat rushed to my face as titters bubbled through the crowd. My hands fumbled for the next record, and I dropped the needle with less than my usual flourish. The familiar groove filled the room, and people gradually turned back to their dancing, though I could feel some amused glances thrown my way. Only then did I dare to look up again. She was moving through the crowd, navigating between dancing bodies with deliberate grace. Unlike the others who returned to their revelry, her eyes never left me. Each step was measured, unhurried, like she had all night to close the distance between us. I held my cup with the dregs of Fernandez Black Laborer rum tighter. My throat went dry, my pulse flipped and twisted, but I couldn't look away, didn't want to look away. As she drew closer, each step making the rest of the party fade into background noise. Then she smiled. Not big, not flashy. The parting of her lush lips revealing a peak of white teeth sent electricity racing down my spine, settling low and dangerously in my body. And then before I could look away, she stepped onto the raised platform built into the corner. The click of her heels moved her closer until she was near enough to me so that I could catch the scent of the flowering clover perfume on her skin and see the subtle flutter of her pulse at her throat. I was glad the turntables were between us because I realized two things then. She was exactly my height in those heels, her eyes level with mine, making it impossible to escape her honey dark gaze. And my body, when it came to her, had ideas of its own, wild, reckless ideas. I released the cup and the record jacket and grabbed the edge of the turntable stand until I could feel the metal edge of the turntable pressing into my palms. Lord help me, I thought. This woman will be trouble.
Not sure that it's on. Is it on? Are you guys hearing? Kind of? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Scarlett. Thank you very much, Lance. Two incredible pieces of work. I do want to start on the humor side of things because the the writing in both books, Scarlett's Birthright, as well as your novel, Lance, the humor is intentional. As a writer, you are deliberately inserting that there intentionally. How important is that?
Hello? Hi. Thank you for the question, Ryan. Humor is, I think, central to my writing. Humor has been an important facet of my life, even as I reflect on what may seem to be serious situations. afterwards, I may have the opportunity to laugh at it. In the circumstances, it may be serious. So, case in point, I'm a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force. And I'll just say, Ryan, today the Cadet Force celebrates 116 years. So I'll ask you to just everyone applaud the Cadet Force. So back in 1996, a warrant officer and I were waiting on some cadets navigating with their maps and compasses. We were on the then deserted golf course in Point Fortin. The golf course wasn't cut. The grass was growing up. We were under a mango tree. And we both fell asleep. But then I awakened and we were surrounded by cows. So my first instinct was to call the other officer, Curtis. Curtis. And Curtis woke up and then I threw a pebble at the cows. And I want everyone to know, throwing a pebble at a herd of cows draws them closer. So at that point, it wasn't looking good for us. And in that moment, I didn't laugh at the time. Curtis went into his knapsack. He had come off a 4-day exercise over 50 miles, and he had some rations remaining. He pulled out a tin of corned beef and he pointed it at the cows. If you come closer, this will happen to you. And the bull, there was a black bull. The black bull took 2 paces back and turned around, and the cows left. And we were saved by a tin of corned beef. Target corned beef, everyone.
Lance, thank you so much for that. Scarlett, I use the word intentional humor because we have this long tradition of our writers injecting humor into their work. Just to tell a couple quick ones from me that stand out. In Naipaul's The Mystic Masu, there's this moment in which the protagonist writes a book, and his father-in-law, he goes to his father-in-law, and his father-in-law is upset because he didn't dedicate the book to him. And then, there's Sam Selvon. In one of his writings, he gets, one of the protagonists gets very frustrated at one point, and he says, only the Indians who are Christians going anywhere in this country. They feel the need to inject humor. Is it important because it keeps the writer turning pages?
Such a great question. I don't know. I feel that the way that stories come out of our lives includes this humor. I don't think that I do it deliberately. I think it just happens. And I think it's perhaps the way we grew up, the way that things were told to us. It's just something that happens naturally. I was telling Lance earlier, I am not trying to be funny, but it comes out, right? And people can identify with it. But I think that it's the Trinbagonian way, I think, or even the Caribbean way, because I'm friends with so many people from different places in the Caribbean, and the thing that's common is our ability to laugh, even if we're hurting, which is a it underscores a lot of the story that I tell even.
Yeah, when you're writing, you're sort of having a conversation with yourself in your mind, and that pours
It's not
out
with
on the
myself, it's all the people in my mind.
page. Wow. I would hate to be in her mind. Lance, in your work, you really capture several themes. You really try to immortalize, particularly in the rural parts of the country, language, music, texture, feeling, smell. Why was it important for you to really try to immortalize those feelings and characteristics?
Well, there's I think everyone understands that the majority of the country lives in the rural part. Everywhere past the lighthouse is country. So I'm a bona fide country bookie because I'm from San Fernando. So the reality for us is that there are so many things that are just commonplace in our lives. And you sometimes smell someone before you get to know them. I had an uncle who he passed away in 1995, and I still fondly recall his toe jam. Just may he rest in peace, but that was his signature smell, just saying. But for us, all those elements make our lives.
I apologize. Your central theme starts with love. It quickly descends, if you haven't read her novel, it quickly descends into a story of absence and the consequences of that absence. What inspired Jerome's journey?
Scarlet Birthright is a conversation between myself and my father.
Really?
Yes, so it is a fictionalized account of my life. Many of the scenes I would say may be fictitious, but the feelings that rose up are completely genuine and what I felt. Yes, it is about absence because my father, in real life, he left Trinidad when I was just a few months old and he immigrated to the United States. And for most of my life, it meant Christmases were spent with him, some parts of summers were spent with him. Um, of course, I tell a different story in Scarlet Birthright because the truth about it is, even when I was with him, we really never had conversations. You know, it was this little child. He had a completely other story. And I think that I'm a something year old. And I think that I didn't realize that that hurt was being carried the whole time. And so Scarlet Birthright grew out of a very, very short story where it became, and when I tell you their story, they're in my head. It came out of, I think, a conversation with him to reimagine, perhaps, and put myself in his shoes. And what came out was stunning because it was about really forgiveness and a deeper understanding of perhaps what his story might have been.
Yeah, but also I like the forgiveness part, but a major part for me as well is how you went about tackling the themes of masculinity and responsibility, because Jerome is constantly battling. The protagonist is constantly battling and making all of his decisions based on what he thinks is a successful man. How do you determine what is a successful man? You really
Yes.
brought together those teams really well.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I really used what I knew of him through all those years. I knew that he was just 19 when he had me. And it's only as an older person looking back at that that you recognize that, because as a kid you don't. But I also knew my grandfather. I grew up with my grandfather. I knew how harsh of a person he was, and I knew what he expected. And for all intents and purposes, Ryan, I channeled my own husband because I know how hard he is with our sons as well, right? But I think the key to it is out of my own story, because I remembered I interpreted things as a child and as a young adult that were happening, but I was completely wrong. When I lived here in Trinidad, my first boyfriend was no good for me at all. But my grandmother, she didn't say anything. And then when I came to the realization that this relationship wasn't working out very well, I broke up with him instantly, Ryan. my grandmother decided, okay, son, it's time to send for her. And you know what that means. And how did I interpret that? I interpret that as, oh, my grandmother wants to get me away from this boy. I never said anything to her, but I understood what that meant, or at least I thought I did. And so years later, when I said to her, I was making a video of her, and I said, oh, you just wanted to get me away from that boy. She said, what? No, I loved him. What are you talking about? I just wanted you to I couldn't afford to send you to university here. And I felt that it was time for your father to do it. So this concept, Ryan, that I try to channel for Jerome is that as kids, as young people, we are constantly interpreting lessons, I think, from our parents that or people around us that may not be rooted in truth. And sometimes it's only when you ask the questions that you get the true answer. And I think for Jerome, he was interpreting what he saw. And also the silences we talked about is his parents thinking maybe we should have said more things to him so that he could get more information. But that silence is a thing that runs through all, I think, Caribbean families. We don't really talk a lot, but a lot of assumptions are made.
That's so true. A lot of your writing as well, Lance, seems to be autobiographical, but yet fictionalized. How do you balance both the memory from which you are writing from with the imagination in your writing?
Most of my stories emerged from real life experiences, but once I begin to write, my imagination takes over. And memories may come up in phrases, memories may come up in the way people pronounce certain words. In my first story, Ethelbert and the Free Cheese, I drew on the experiences of a neighbor who would come out every Juve morning with his whip and fight with other jabs in San Fernando until one day he was beaten mercilessly, returned home in ripped garments, and never ventured out for carnival ever again. But I was fascinated that big men would hit each other with whips when people just wanted to enjoy carnival, and that was his enjoyment. And it was so graphic to see it that the memory never left me. So it found itself into my story.
You also tackle themes, reading your work. Really, you go into uh, the past. And when I say the past, you really dig into the colonial aspect of our country, that legacy, migration. You even tackle class differences. But you don't, what I've noticed is you reach to a limit and you don't go overtly political in it. Is that intentional, or are you conscious of the limits by which you will tackle those themes of class and migration and racism?
My grandfather came from Barbados in 1920, and I knew him. He was a wonderful baker. Every time you visited him, he had a slice of cake to give you. And as such, I grew up I knew my family from Barbados. I know them still. And therefore, I grew up understanding that I'm part of a wider region. I'm part of the Caribbean. The reality is that I never set out to write anything that's political, but I try to weave the realities of experiences into what I write. So my father was denied the opportunity to write the precursor to Common Entrance, which was Exhibition. And he never let us forget it. So he would emphasize, you're only getting chances I didn't get, And he never let that hold him back, really. But the fact is that I cannot ignore those realities that have shaped my experiences. And I will add on the point of migration, the late historian Louis Regis said, Trinidad and Tobago is a zone of migration in the Caribbean, which in itself is a zone of migration. People have always migrated to the Caribbean, and once in the Caribbean, they migrate to Trinidad. And when they reach Port of Spain, they migrate to San Fernando. Just had to add that part.
But on your same point, a large part of your work is things left unsaid. There's a lot of silence within Scarlet's birthright, a lot of silence. And is that emblematic, Scarlet, of one, Caribbean life, and two, Caribbean males who don't often voice how they feel? What were you trying to achieve with this silence that you could actually feel in this novel?
I wanted to represent my experience, and it was, and yes, I do think that, okay, so one of the things that I do know is that sometimes when people read my stories, there's so much that comes out that I never really intended. And what the lovely thing about this writing journey has been for me is that each person reading the book really sees their own story in it. And it might be very different from mine. It's interesting now that I've had perhaps three men interview me, and all of them raised the fact about the men, and I didn't really set out to focus in that. Um, but I will try to answer your story, your question. I think that I think that what is lovely is that I discover things that I never really intended. The silence for me was the silence between my father and me. And in fact, I think in my life, I would say that there's a general silence. We don't talk about a lot of things. I read very recently about somebody who their mother was dying of colon cancer, but the mother didn't prepare them, right? And it reminded me that my aunt, she was in the hospital here, right? Port of Spain General Hospital. I had to come from the US to come here because, and I said, what is she in the hospital for? Nobody knew. They went, they visited her every day. My grandmother took food for her, everything, but nobody asked. It was the weirdest thing. And I think that being exposed to like American culture, it also has changed me in many ways. Because as soon as I came, I said to her, Auntie, why are you in here? And she said colon cancer, and I'm like, oh my God. And so I was able to ask more questions and be deliberate. But that whole thing of never asking is so emblematic of, I think, Trinidad culture as a whole, but especially men. I think women do talk to each other a whole lot more, but do we really talk about the things that are hurting us, the things that are, I'm not sure. So I think that what I wanted to do was really express that this culture of silence is something that I wanted. Number one, the grace to say, it's okay, I understand, and also do something different, right? And so I had where Trisha chose differently in the story eventually. I hope that answers your question. I don't know about these men, Ryan. I don't. I can't.
Me neither. One of the things that struck me about your book, Lance, and while I was sort of reading through it, I felt this was somewhat of a history piece that I was reading, because some of the things in your book, you might agree with me, we're losing as a society. And so you look at themes like, we talked about carnival, baking, Trinidadian pecan, neighborhood life, church life. And I wondered to myself while I was reading your novel, what is this guy trying? What is he hoping that future generations who read this novel will be able to extract from it?
One of the things I really hope everyone will recognize after reading my collection of short stories is that Carnival, Pekong, Church, those are or have been typical experiences for many of us. I'll emphasize that Pekong never ends. And there are some people who may be a bit thin-skinned now, but I went to a school where everybody got it. From the first day you got your name, and those names have stayed with friends like forever. So the reality is that you learn to deal with your blows and you learn to respond in kind. It isn't that serious. So we learn to recognize that there's some things we can't internalize as being difficult or hard. Let it roll off your back and move on.
I want to open up the floor now to any questions the audience might have. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and we will bring a mic to you. In the interim, while I'm waiting on that first question, I do want to touch on something that felt personal to young people in the Caribbean these days. You outlined in a few stories, a couple of those short stories, the limitations, the aspirations first of Caribbean people, but also you really painted a picture of the limitations of our small societies. What do you think young people can grasp out of particularly those short stories where you painted this picture of great aspirations, but also so vividly showed how limited we are in this region?
Even though we are limited in the region, the world has changed. So both Scarlet and I were talking about it. The avenues to publishing are clearly different now in 2026 than they were maybe 40 years ago, 30 years ago. One does not have to wait on one of the big publishers to get one's book out there. And similarly, young people will have to recognize, hopefully, that in spite of the limitations of the place in which you reside, the world is much more connected than before, and the possibilities are endless.
Your title of your novel, What They Left Behind, emotional, it can be physical, it can be generational. Which one does it mean to you personally?
So the writing process, names of the book evolved. So it was always Scarlet Birthright, but it actually started off as What He Left Behind. Because initially it was just focused on my father. And through the editing process, I had a male editor for this one, only because I wanted to make sure that I was being honest in the way that I was portraying the voice of the men, because there are lots of men in the book. And he said to me that he felt as though we only saw the mother through the eyes of Jerome. And with that, I actually decided to add the third part of my book, so that came much later. And at that point, then it was both of them leaving her a legacy. And also, with that third part, it gave me an opportunity to delve into Ghanaian or Akan religious sentiments, which I love that you call back some of the great Trinidadian writers. One of them for me was Earl Lovelace, and I loved how he always portrayed the idea of African spirituality in a way that honors it. I think that growing up in Trinidad, I didn't have enough opportunity to really experience that. I grew up Catholic as well, Ryan. But I think that the last three sort of interludes in the book really gave me an opportunity to bring the voice of the mother from her point of view. into the book. And so it went from what they left behind, I'm sorry, what he left behind to what they left behind. And I thought that that was a more holistic view of the story of Trisha.
Excellent. We do have a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Alet, for those of you who don't know me. But my question is for you, Scarlett. In terms of, so I hear you talking about the transitions, but this is how I interpret it. Some of the transitions that would have happened in you bringing this book to life. But what I want to delve into is having to go that deep and having to do that sort of navigation. At some point, did it, in layman terms, mess with you emotionally? And did that like manifest in any way that forced you to have some sort of tension or resistance as to how much you wanted to leave on the page?
Thank you for that question, Alette. Um, this was a very emotional journey for me. When I started writing the story of Jerome, I did not intend for it to be a novella. It was going to be a short story. It was only going to be that first scene, really, from the book, and then I wanted it to be also when he met the little girl. But what came out for me was, well, let me say it a different way. I believe that writing is quite spiritual. I believe that it's an opportunity to do some root work in your own life. I didn't realize that I was carrying a lot. Um, you know how they say functioning alcoholics? I probably was in a functional emotional wreck. Um, and in doing so, when I first wrote the story, I really wrote Jerome very harshly from the point of view of a very hurt girl who wanted a father who looked like the fathers on television, right? The Cosbys, or, some of these really great father figures. But that's not what I got. And in doing so, doing the work of really understanding who he was, I think what came up for me was an understanding that it was probably not about me, which is strange because I think the world revolves around me, of course, right? Everybody does. But it was not. I think that he was trying to do the best that he could. And so I think, Alette, it was hard and um, it was an unpeeling of how I felt and letting go of a lot of anger, a lot, and a lot of hurt. Um, and I think that where I ended up was where perhaps the spirits wanted me to be. Does that make sense? It was hard, yes, but I put all of it on the page. I just want to address one other thing. I do talk about family, and like Lance, it is autobiographical fiction, and I think my sisters would absolutely know who I'm talking about at every point in time. And I think sometimes there are lots of people who have their own stories that they want to tell about family. And it's hard because those people might be still alive, they might be looking at them in a very positive way. And for me, it was actually harder to write about a father who my sister loved and grew up with, right? She had a completely different experience from me. And then my older sister, who lived with him her whole life, but again didn't have this magical experience that I was thinking I would have if I was with him. And so, in giving the book over to my sisters and having them read it, and then having them say, oh my God, this is great. And then having them say, oh my God, I had a different experience, but I understand yours. I thought it really helped me come to terms. That was actually the hardest piece. And if they had said, no, this is wrong, I might have had a different conversation about what was published. But they absolutely gave me their blessing as well, which was lovely.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience. If there is anyone who'd like to ask a question, there is a mic there. If not, yeah, we have one right there. So, very good questions.
Just as a follow-up question, given that foundation and that kind of emotional journey, do you think you discovered anything about the relationship between hurt and humor?
I was telling Lance earlier there was nothing funny about my journey. I think I think it was very no, the short answer to the question. I think it was lovely in that it was cathartic and forgiveness and redemption and but no, not funny at all. This lady here in the green had a
Please,
question.
yes.
Hi, so do you think healing from emotional trauma is easier being older, or do you think it doesn't matter what age you do it?
I think you have to follow your journey. I think if you're just open to what comes, yeah? And I think life, always say that there's a divine order to things. I firmly believe it. So one of the questions Ryan didn't get to was about mothers and motherhood in this. And I would tell you right now, I am not ready to talk about my mother, right? Like in the book, I had, and my mother did not pass away when she had me. So my mother was in Trinidad all along my whole life. And it was a challenging experience. She loved me. I was probably her favorite, but it was very hard. And so I would say to you, even at this age, I am still not ready for that story. I was ready for my father's. Does that make sense? So I think that the journey towards healing is very individual and you have to be open and lean in when you are ready. When you're ready. But writing is a lovely way to start through journaling, etc. I created a book out of Scarlet Birthright, Rhythms of the Soul, because I needed help with getting through all the things that were happening with me. And so I offered that. I don't really publicize it a lot, but it helped me through my journey as well.
That's actually where I wanted us to head towards the end. I wanted both of you, Lance and Scarlett. There are a lot of aspiring writers at the Bocas Lit Fest, as well as in this room. There are those who have penned and trying to pen a second novel. What is the one piece of advice you would give to aspiring authors who want to one day be a published author and ultimately on this stage?
Just right. The reality is that for me, I started to write because I had an idea. And I left my story untouched for 15 years until my sister persistently reminded me, you have to do something with it. So Ethelbert and the free cheese could have been lying in a box still um, if it wasn't for her persistence. But the reality is that having done that, I decided I'm just going to continue writing. So I have several unfinished pieces that maybe will see the light of day one day, just maybe.
Looking forward to it. Scarlett?
Yes, just right. I think that it is hard though to open up yourself and let others read what's been on your mind. Definitely begin there. And once you're ready, I think share it with somebody perhaps that's close to you. Or the opposite is share it with an editor who knows nothing about you and that can help you in that journey towards fruition. But definitely begin. Yours took a winner too, 10 years, I think. Yes, for
15,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Takes a while.
Yeah. And so I think write, get it out. For me, my journey started with writing very short snippets on platforms like medium.com or Substack. It's a way to get your writing and to work the muscle of getting that out. And then I decided to take it further when others started really responding. Because know this, your story, yes, it's yours and it's unique. But the truth about it is somebody needs to hear it. And you never know how they're going to respond to it until you get it out. But it is divine and it's supposed to be out there. So please, if you've got your story, get it out.
Scarlet Ibis, James Lance Dowrich. Ladies and gentlemen, both authors will be outside by a table signing books. Just give them a couple of minutes to get there. Also, all of the books at the Bocas Literature Festival, including Scarlet's Birthright as well as Long Rope for Magagoot, are both available for purchase in the library atrium. Ladies and gentlemen, please, one more time for Scarlet Ibis, James and Lance Dowrich.
Thank you.